All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Tanner. I am the discipleship pastor here at VLG Heights, and I'm excited to kick off this collection with you. Have you ever wondered why? But before we dive in, I was told that we need to go over a couple of things, or one thing really. If you would like to follow along today with the message, with the scriptures that we're going to be going over, we have in the Bible app. If you open up the Bible app, or if you don't have the Bible app, you should download it. It's really cool. In the bottom right-hand corner, you click on More, and then you scroll down, find Events, and then VLG Heights is the first one that pops up on the top, and it's got all of everything in there that you need. It's got what we're doing after church today, our back-to-school event coming up, all that good stuff. So how to get that plugged in there for you guys. So I'm going to get a little vulnerable with you guys today. I may cry. I probably won't cry. I'm not big on crying. Jamie told me I should cry. Show of hands, who wants me to cry, right? Okay, just kidding. No, whoa, put your hands down. Put your hands down. Okay, whoa, chill out. Chill out, guys. Goodness, chill out. But today we're asking the question, have you ever wondered why God allows pain and suffering? And I'm sure most of you have wondered that. I have wondered that myself. And a time in my life when I really was wondering that was 4-ish years ago, maybe closer to 5-ish years ago now. My life literally fell completely apart. I had been working a job for a small oil production company, and this is all in the course of like a week. So just know that. And so the first thing that happens is I find out I'm getting laid off. I can either move back to the middle of nowhere and work in the office there, or they're just going to cut my job, and good luck, you're going to have to find something else to do. And I was like, okay, well, I could find something else to do. Not the worst thing that could happen to me, or so I thought. And literally 3 days later, give or take, my wife at the time comes home and says, I'm leaving you. And she left. That was it. She was gone. And don't want to dwell on that too much. But so that happened. My wife at the time left me, and then 3 days later, my baby sister is in an absolutely horrific car accident. She was working in the Woodlands at the Dick's Sporting Goods and going to school in Huntsville at Sam Houston, and she was driving home from work, and her car wrecks, and she flips 7 times, and is in a medical-induced coma for 2 weeks. The doctors, whenever we first get to the hospital, they're like, we don't know if she's had oxygen to her brain. Like, we don't know if we don't know anything. Like, we're making her breathe right now. That's all we know. Like, her heart is pumping, but we don't know, like, what state she's going to be in if she wakes up or when she wakes up. And so that was a very dark time. And I tell you all that, not so you feel bad for me or anything, but because pain and suffering is very real. And so I don't go into this question or into this thought experiment lightly. Like, I've been down in the deep, darkest places of the soul. Like, I've been there. I've felt extreme loss and extreme loneliness and felt what it feels like to feel like an extreme failure and to know just literally what it feels like for your entire life to just seem like it's just gone up in smoke, quite literally. But God turned everything around, right? God was there on the other side with a marriage that, dang it, guys, you got me. With a marriage that sets the standard for what love in a marriage should be, with a new job that is just amazing, and my sister had a miraculous recovery and ended up graduating top of her class at Sam Houston after suffering a traumatic brain damage. Like, God was there on the other side of that pain and suffering. And so today, that's what I want to talk about with you is when we ask the question, why God? And this question is something, man, I'm trying to get my composure. I didn't expect to cry, but whew, got me. I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick. Asaph, the psalmist, and Asaph was one of David's music directors in the temple. Asaph was also a prophet. And so Asaph kind of had some leeway with writing the Psalms that he didn't necessarily, David didn't go up to him and say, hey, here's the psalm that I've written. I want you to perform this in the temple. Asaph, being a prophet, he had some status. He was able to write some things of his own, and this is one of the two psalms that are attributed to him directly writing. And so Asaph struggled with this question as well. And so in Psalm 73, 11 through 13, Asaph says, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked. They're always at ease. They increase in riches. And all in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. And this is exactly where I found myself. I was, this week, it was literally the week of Mother's Day, so my mom was having a great week too that week. But at this time in my life, I had, given up everything to follow God. I had planned on going to law school. I had an internship in Washington, D.C. lined up if I wanted it, and I turned all of that down to come into the ministry, to go to Bible college. I thought, everyone else is getting married. Like, I just need to do it, because if I don't get married, no one's going to hire me at a church, because you've got to be married to be a pastor. And so I rushed into something that I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And so, but at the time, I'm sitting there as everything's going on, and I remember there was one day that Hannah came to my house to help me finish packing up the rest of my stuff, and I just remember I was kneeling down on the ground, and I just literally just screamed at God, because I was like, how could you do this to me? I've given up everything to follow you. I thought I was listening to you, and this is what I get in return? Is you've taken my job, you've taken my marriage, you're potentially taking my sister? Like, what on earth is going on here? And this is exactly where Asaph is. He's like, all these people who do the wickedest things have it so easy. Their life is so great. They've got all the riches, all the friends, all the prestige, and I have nothing. I'm left with nothing. And like I said, this is a question that goes back a long, long time, and it's such a powerful question. It's even led to the creation of the only argument that tries to prove that God does not exist. And the argument is first attributed to Epicurus in the 300s BC, and then it was gone on to be popularized by David Hume in his dialogues concerning natural religion. And his argument follows like this: the biblical God cannot exist given all of the evil and suffering in the world. The biblical God is all-powerful and all-good. However, given evil and suffering in the world, he may either be all-powerful and not good enough to want to stop it, or all good but not powerful enough to be able to stop it. Because there is evil and suffering in the world, you either have a God who is all-powerful and not all good, or all good and not all-powerful. You cannot have a God whom is all good and all-powerful. Therefore, because the biblical God is all good and all-powerful, and evil and suffering do exist, the biblical God cannot exist. And so this argument is what is known in philosophy and apologetics as the atheological argument against the existence of God. And like I said, it's one of the only arguments that says that God can't exist. But there's two ways in which we encounter this question, right? In my situation, when you're deep in the pain and suffering of life, it's purely emotional, right? Rationality, logic, you just take that and you just chunk it out the window because it doesn't matter. And so you can face this question rationally, philosophically. but you also have to face it emotionally. And the philosophical question, honestly, is the easiest hurdle to overcome, at least for me. When we talk about evil and when we talk about suffering purely on an intellectual level, it sort of loses its teeth, right? It's the emotions that are more raw. The emotions are more real. The emotions, I mean, that's the feeling. That's where all the feeling is in the suffering. And it's so true. The reason this argument is so powerful, especially today, is because we are driven 110% by our emotions. I mean, I feel like I use Facebook and social media as an example all the time, but it's really true. It's like we just hop on that thing and let our emotions run wild. We just fly off. Whatever is bothering us, we're just going to let it fly. Yeah, this, yeah, that. Like we're just letting it loose because it's just an instant emotional gratification. We're just driven by our emotions. So let's address this question. Let's see if we can't answer this question for Asaph and for ourselves. So when we address the man, I can't talk. I got all flustered, guys. Jeez Louise. When we address the philosophical question, we have to look at it in two parts. Evil and suffering is not evidence against the existence of God. But I would say that evil and suffering is evidence for his existence. And here's why. So let's take a look at the argument again. The all-good and all-powerful God of the Bible cannot exist because evil and suffering exist in the world. Given evil and suffering, God may either be all-good but not powerful enough to be able to stop it, or all-powerful but not good enough to want to stop it. Therefore, because the biblical God is all-powerful and all-good, and evil and suffering do exist, the biblical God cannot exist. One of my favorite authors of all time, C.S. Lewis, he once said that it's critically important to examine the assumptions that are within a question. And this argument, of how could God exist if all this bad things are going on, has some assumptions. There's some assumptions smuggled into the question itself. And the first assumption that this argument makes is that that God honestly couldn't be justified in allowing evil and suffering. And the second assumption is that man, apart from God, is able to make value claims based on moral objectivity. Example, good and evil, right? So the first assumption is that God could have no justifiable reasons. Well, in order to know that, you're saying a lot of things. And there's an old Buddhist proverb that talks about there's an emperor, and he calls in these 4 blind men into his courtyard of his castle. And he's got an elephant, and he says, I want you to tell me what this is. And so all the blind men are filling the elephant's legs. They say, oh, it's a tree. Oh, it's got to be, it's some sort of a fortress. They go on, list all these things of what they think it is, obviously never coming to an answer. But the only one who could possibly know is the emperor, because he is transcendent above the situation. They have no way of knowing. They don't have the tools or the equipment necessary to know what it is. The only person who has a clear vision of what's going on in the world is God. We can't see it because we're in the middle of it. I have this little example that I like to use is this little push pin here. The very tippy tip of it. Can you see it? Can everybody see the tip of this push pin? You can't see it? Okay, I didn't think so. But just level with me for a second. So imagine this push pin. The tip of this push pin is the earth. And everything beyond that, all of Houston, Texas, the United States, the actual earth, is all of the created universe. In order to say that you know why evil and suffering exist in this little pinprick, you have to be outside of that. And we're not. It takes something transcendent to be able to assign value judgments to something else, right? So I can say this phone is valuable to me because I am transcendent beyond this phone. This phone is not a logical thinking creature. It's beyond that. I can't say that, Bill has intrinsic human value. I have to get that idea from something transcendent beyond human beings. I can't assign him intrinsic worth. I believe he has it, but I can't give it to him. Like, I can't make him worth anything. I mean, I think you're valuable, Bill. I think, yeah. You are a valuable person. But because God says so, not because I say so. But that's the only way that value gets assigned, right? Something has to be higher than it. A piece of gold doesn't have any value because of other gold pieces say it's worth something. No, I say, oh, this is shiny. It's got to be worth something. It's got to have value. And that's how value works. It's a transcendent. It's on a scale. And so in order to say that, oh, well, if evil things exist, or if God can't exist because bad things happen, you're putting yourself in God's shoes. You are not God. In order to say these things, you have to be God. You're putting yourself in his shoes. And so then this brings us to the second assumption. So when a person is saying that there is such a thing as evil, you have to say that there is such a thing as good. And if there's such a thing as good, like we just talked about in the first assumption, there has to be some sort of moral law. There has to be a set of rules that we all live by, that we all inherently know exist in order to even make the claim. And so if there's a moral law, then there has to be a place from which the moral law itself comes. There has to be a moral law giver, God. The only being capable of giving a moral law has to be transcendent. And this is really where you can rationalize this argument, and you're not even concerned about it anymore. After you've thought it through, you're like, oh yeah, of course, like I get it. I can piece this all together. If we're all just the end result of time plus matter plus chance, then good and evil become illusions. And atheists take this all the time and say, well, just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean I can't be a good person. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying that, but you have no reason that you ought to be a good person. There's no reason that you should be a good person. There's no reason that you should do anything. There's no oughtness, as the philosophers say. Oughtness. There's no driving thing that makes you want to be a good person other than you just have ingrained in you the moral law, which makes it a circular argument. Like, that's the reason you want to do good in the first place, is because God exists. If he didn't exist, there's no point in it. My absolute favorite author of all time, Fyodor Dostoevsky, in his great book, The Brothers Karamazov. If you have an entire winter to spend reading a slightly depressing Russian novel, you should read it. It's very good, and it will take you all winter to read it because it's very long. But there's a section in this book titled The Grand Inquisitor, and in it, Alyosha, the youngest brother, who's also a monk, he's exploring kind of the existence of God. His family is just a hot pile of garbage. I mean, you thought my story sounded sad, like his family was garbage. And he's wrestling with this, and he comes to the conclusion that if God doesn't exist, then all things are permitted. We can do anything that we want to do. It doesn't matter. Who is there to say that I can't walk up to my brother and stab him in the chest? Like, who's there to say I can't do that? If the lines start washing away. But we know that there's a sense of justice. We all have that. We have that sense inside of us that something bad is being done to us. And this is when we can start transitioning it into the personal, the emotional level. The philosophical problem, in my opinion, isn't really a problem at all. But most of us don't live in the philosophical world. Most of us aren't just constantly rational beings. If we are, you're like Mr. Spock, right? Like, I haven't met anyone quite like that. I'm sure there's somebody out there. Maybe you're here today, but I don't think any of you are Spock from Star Trek. That's my nerd is showing. Some of you are probably like, who the heck is Mr. Spock? Yeah, I can tell. You don't know who Spock is. All right. Anyways, so moving on from Spock. But God didn't just let us endure suffering on our own. The Bible and the Christian religion anticipates pain and suffering. It expects there to be an amount of pain and suffering in your life. In fact, John Lennox, one of the greatest apologists of our time, who is a mathematician at Oxford University, he says that Christianity is the only religion audacious enough to say that God came to earth just to suffer with men. Like, it's central to our beliefs. Pain and suffering is a part of our belief system. Pain and suffering is a part of what it means to be a Christian. And it's not pain and suffering for its own sake. It's not that we should just go around looking for more ways to have pain and suffer. We shouldn't be like the medieval flagellants, not flatulence. Sorry about that. The flagellants who whipped themselves, to feel pain because they thought it brought them closer to God. That's not the point. Pain does bring us closer to God, but it's what God does with that pain. It's what God does with those deep, dark situations that he takes us out of and builds something new for us and builds something better than we could have ever imagined. And Christ himself felt this. He felt what it meant, what it felt like when I was down on my knees screaming at God, asking him where he was. Christ himself, the Lord Jesus himself, felt this. In Matthew 27:46, says this when Jesus is on the cross and he's been there for 9 hours. And it says, "And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani?' And that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this is the beauty of Christianity. This is the beauty of what it means to be a Christ follower, is that my God stepped down out of heaven and hung on a cross to feel what it feels like to be like me, to feel what it feels like to be a human being. And he redeemed us through that. Because he was so far beyond us. He's so far beyond anything. He needed to come down and know what it was like to be a man, to know what it felt like, how deep and dark this life is sometimes. And he did it. And he came down and he died and he made something beautiful out of it. Christianity does not guarantee us an escape from the pain and suffering of this fallen world. And I'm sorry if you're sitting in here today and someone told you that lie. I genuinely am sorry. If someone said, "Oh, just be a Christian, it's going to make your life so much better." Jesus never said that. Jesus told his disciples to pick up their cross and follow him. He said, "You will suffer for my name." Like, that's our promise, is we're going to get more pain and suffering, but we also have the promise that something amazing is going to be made out of that. Something beautiful is going to come out of that. I just keep looking at Jamie because it's so true, guys. Like, God can take you from the deepest, darkest pit to a beautiful marriage with a kid and another one on the way. Like, God can do it, I promise you. And I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. It's going to feel like hell at times. It's just life. But something beautiful will come out of the suffering. And I know this isn't really an answer as to why does pain exist? Why does suffering exist? I don't know why. I think that it's because God wanted us to be able to love him. And in order to love something, you have to choose that thing, right? You have to have an element of free will. If Jamie, was programmed like a robot to love me, that would not be a marriage, that would be slavery, right? Like, that's not love. We know that is not love. And God is obviously no different because he gave us that capacity. And so in order for us to love him, we have to be able to choose something that is not him and enter in the pain and suffering, enter in the fall of man, the fall of Adam and Eve that brought all of this pain and heartache that we experience about. It's the choices, and maybe not even your choice, but the choices of people around you also impact you, and it just compounds on itself. It's like the butterfly effect, basically. That's the way sin works. It just ruins everything. It ruins the entire creation that God made, and it's not supposed to be that way, and that's why whenever we experience pain and suffering, we get down on our knees and scream out, "Where are you, God?" Because that's not him. He's nowhere in that. He has nothing to do with that, but he's there to take you out of that. He's there to bring you out of that. And so in order for us to love God, we have to be able to reject God. And God created us for freedom, to live and experience the fullness of what he had made. And so that is the hope of Christianity. It's that through the suffering of Jesus, we are redeemed. And when we enter into all of eternity, this life will be nothing but the tip of this pin. It will be nothing to us anymore. I think a very beautiful example of this, if you're readers, you should go out and buy a copy of C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. Get it from Amazon. It explains, it's just a thought experiment about what it's like to go to heaven. And you truly don't care about what's going on in the world anymore. Of course, you still love the people you loved and are interested in your friends, but you're experiencing the thing you were made to experience. So of course it's like, what does this 5 seconds of eternity matter in the grand scheme of things? The Great Divorce. In Revelation 21, 4-5 says this: "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." And that's our hope, is that this life, everything we've experienced at the end of time is going to be completely wiped away. And Jesus is going to wipe the tears from our eyes. And he's going to make all things new. And I can personally guarantee you that he will do that. And so maybe today you're experiencing some form of pain and suffering. I know just the beginning of this week, I was experiencing pain and suffering in the form of a toddler who had an ear infection. And if you're a parent in here and have had toddlers, you probably could have told me that what to expect. But it was a nightmare, guys. Like, I thought he was possessed. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat, just wanted to cry. He would roll around on the ground. I am a new parent, so dumb me was like, oh, it's probably just like a sleep regression. Oh, he's just a toddler acting out. He was not, guys. Took him to the doctor, and it was like fixed instantly. So take your kid to the doctor. That's another moral that you've learned from me today. If you don't remember anything else, take your kid to the doctor if they're acting different. You'll trust me. But, in these day-to-day things, we experience just these little bits of what it feels like to feel as if God is far from us, but he's not. And that is our comfort, is that Jesus came here to suffer with us, not to leave you alone in your suffering, not to forget about you. He hasn't forgotten about you. Maybe someone here needs to hear that today. God has not forgotten about you. He came and suffered for you to know what it feels like. And there's coming a day where we are not going to be dealing with pain and suffering anymore. And Asaph, we return to him in Psalm 73, he realized the same thing. In verse 16, he said this: "When I tried to understand all of this, it troubled me deeply. Until I entered the sanctuary of God, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." And so today, you came here to church, to the sanctuary of God, and I only think that it's appropriate that we take some time this morning and pray and offer up those things that are hurting us, those hurts, that baggage that we're carrying around, and offer it to God, because like Asaph said, when we enter the sanctuary of God, we find that even though my flesh and my heart may fail, God is our strength and he's our portion forever, and he wants to meet you where you are today, I promise you, and start taking that from you. So would you guys I know Hannah says we don't normally do this, but I just feel like we should. Would you guys stand with me this morning? And I just want to pray for you guys. And you can pray your own prayer softly to yourself, but I just want to take a minute to pray for all of us here this morning. Lord, we just thank you that you see us where we are, that you have not forgotten us, that you have not forsaken us, but you paid the ultimate price to know what it felt like to be a human being. You came and you bled and you died and you suffered the most agonizing of deaths to know what it was like to be a human and to reconcile us to you, Lord. We thank you for that sacrifice. And I just pray for everyone in this room, for anyone going through any sort of pain, any sort of loss, any sort of agony, whether it be physically, emotionally, Lord, financially, whatever it is. I just pray that today that we lay these things down at your feet and we give them over to you, Father. Because I know what you can do with the mess that we make of our own lives. I know what you can do with the pain and the suffering that we go through. I know the diamonds that you can make out of it, Lord. And I just pray that you begin to pour out your blessings on these people today. Help them to see your love. Help them to experience you newly this week, Lord. I pray that this week, as we leave this place and go about our week, that we begin to see your hand even in our trials and our tribulations, that we begin to feel your presence near us and know that you are right there alongside of us, going through it all. In your holy name we pray. Amen.